Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All right, all of our guests today on this Friday, including John Shannon, standing by, brought to you by Al Chris Manson and our friends at the Whistler Golf Club. Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox, unsigned. A lot of the outstanding texts today, unsigned. Sign those texts, folks. We want to give you credit. Trade Demko to Buffalo, Petey to Chicago, and in 7 years, the Atlanta Canucks will hoist the cup. Having a little fun at the Canucks' expense. Joined now by NHL analyst, co-host of the Bob McCown podcast, John Shannon. John, thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
I'm great, but I can't believe the world's Canada's greatest athlete isn't on the show.
Yeah. You know what? We have to get a hold of that picture, blow it up, nice, and make a poster out of it so we can put it in our studio. That's outstanding.
You know where that's from?
No.
The BC Sports Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Which is a block away from where we are.
2 feet away.
Right. Yeah.
So, as a kid, John, I believed that Gene Kiniski was Canada's greatest athlete. He sold himself well, didn't he?
I'll tell you what. As an adult, I'm not necessarily a wrestling fan, but who could forget Sandor Kovacs? Who could forget Dean Higuchi? Who could forget, everybody that was involved in all-star wrestling, which was what it was called in British Columbia at the time. That to me was Saturday afternoon, boys, just before hockey started.
Cloverdale. Yeah. It was out of Cloverdale.
Well, it was at Peony Gardens.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Don Leo, Jonathan, Bulldog Brown, John Toll, Eric Froelich. I could go on and on. It was
Playboy Buddy Rose.
Jonathan. I forgot about Don Leo Jonathan. That's right.
Yeah. And Dutch Savage with the thumb.
Dean Higuchi was my favorite, though. Yeah. Dean Higuchi was he was the athletic guy, and every once in a while they'd come to a small town like Oliver and pack the arena with about 1,300 people. It was glorious.
Yeah, and apparently they went to Cloverdale as well.
If they were in Cloverdale, I'll figure it out.
They might have visited. Yeah. Okay, Tampa Bay over the Canucks 4-3. John, Tyler Myers is taking a lot of criticism in this town. What do you remember about Tyler Myers in Buffalo winning the Calder Trophy in 2010?
I remember he was a puck-moving defenseman that got a lot of support from his teammates, but he was really, everybody thought he was the coming of age of the next era of big guys that could move the puck up and down the ice and get back in time. But obviously that's not really the case anymore. The amazing thing for me is he's coming up to 1,000 games in the National Hockey League, Donnie. I mean, he'll hit the milestone this year. So it's not as if it hasn't been a long, maybe not illustrious, but it's been a long career, and he's had opportunities to play in Buffalo, obviously. He was effective in Winnipeg at times and not necessarily effective in Vancouver.
Making a whole lot of money, and he's the nicest person you ever want to meet, a friend of the show, but going through a tough time right now. So much to talk to you about, John. One thing that we haven't talked a lot about on the show is this story about the NHL contemplating decentralizing the National Hockey League entry draft, much like the NFL does it, NBA does it. What do you think of that idea, and what's the NHL thinking?
Well, I think the NHL is thinking of trying to save money. I think it's the silliest idea I've ever heard of. Quite frankly, what the NHL has been able to create since they moved the draft out of Montreal, because Donnie, when you were a kid and I was a kid, the draft was always in Montreal at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. But then they found something special, being able to put it in front of a studio audience, a live audience, whether it be at the Toronto Convention Center when Wendell Clark was drafted, or at the Montreal Forum. The NHL has something special going with the draft over the 2 days, with a sold out arena, with the families there. Unfortunately, what's happened here is that there's too many guys saying that they want to be in a much more controlled environment. I don't buy it. Every other league would love to do what the NHL's done with its draft. Every other league would love to have 15,000 people there in a stadium and in an arena at the time. And to me, I think that it's one of the special couple of days on the NHL calendar that they're going to ruin. And I don't understand why they want to ruin it.
John, I want to talk about attendance in Winnipeg. Not good, 11,000. But you know what? Ottawa, 15,000. Philly had 14,000 last night. Buffalo's down to 12, 13. What's going on here?
I'm not concerned about Ottawa. I'm not concerned about Philly. Both of those cities have had the last 4 or 5 years have not been able to make the playoffs. Both of those cities, you can see the team improving. The people will come back. I mean, give the people in Ottawa credit. If the team's not any good, don't show up, and they'll get the message. And I think that over the last 3 or 4 years, that the management in Ottawa, now new ownership in Ottawa, will get the message. The Winnipeg one has to be a concern, and I've heard this the last couple of years. The amount of corporate partnerships that the Jets have been able to create has dropped. That's a problem. And the other thing is that when the team came back 10 years ago, people were asked to sign up for 7 years or 5 years or 3 years for season seats. Then a lot of those people signed up again for whether 7, 5, or 3. Now they're asking for a third term. And people are looking at it and say, okay, what have you done for me lately? What have you won? And people are pushing back, saying the price of the tickets is too much. And if there isn't that kind of demand, then I'm just going to go and buy it off the market for maybe the 10 or 11 games that I want, and I don't need season seats. So it's a combination of things in Winnipeg. There's been a lot of trust lost between the team and the fan base when it comes to winning, and that's a problem in Winnipeg.
Yeah, John, I was going to ask you though: is corporate support an issue there?
What's that?
Is corporate support an issue in Winnipeg? Is there enough companies there?
Yeah. I think you have to look at that. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues. But here's the other thing, guys. There was a point early in their time that the Winnipeg Jets actually contributed to revenue sharing. They weren't taking revenue sharing. That's how successful the team was. And the other thing is, the bottom line is that the team is really owned by one of the richest men in the world. David Thompson and the Thompson family own the Winnipeg Jets. They're the majority shareholder. Mark Shipman runs it for them. They've got deep pockets, and if they're committed to the franchise, then that won't be very much of a problem. But the Jets have to start, improving on the ice again. Last year's second half of the season was not very good. Obviously, the issues of what Blake Wheeler stood for, and at times last year what Mark Scheifele stood for, really ticked a lot of fans off. Hopefully, with the signing of Scheifele and his commitment for 7 more years, Connor Hellebuck's commitment for 7 more years, will turn that around. But the team's performance on the ice is the big thing, really, and that's got to change. They've got to be better.
The recent signings has to help the perception of that team with Scheifele and Hellebuck, I would think. Okay, I hope you don't mind this. We call you Mr. Television, and we always ask you questions about the media. But this came up earlier this week, John. And by the way, the Blackhawks losing last night in Colorado, and Taylor Hall came to Connor Bedard's defense earlier this week. Do you think the Blackhawks should be concerned about how many interviews he's doing, especially in-game interviews? I'm talking about Connor Bedard.
Yeah, I would. I would be concerned. And I have to give the Connor and the Bedard family and the guys at Newport Sports who represent him a great deal of credit for what he's done since media day, what he did preseason, what he did to start the season, whether it be in Pittsburgh or Boston or Montreal. They rolled out the red carpet. But you know what? This is the National Hockey League, and sometimes the demands are bigger than the human can actually do. And I think in many ways, by the time they got to Toronto, Connor Bedard had hit the wall. He was available on the Sunday here in Toronto, but then through, I think, good reason, chose not to be available on the Monday game day. And, that's a hard way to start a season, with a 5-game road trip for all the national rights holders through big cities with lots of media. And Connor Bedard's got to get ready now for tomorrow night at home in Chicago too.
Yeah.
So they did everything, and they went above and beyond, Donnie. Yeah. I think Connor deserves a ton of credit. I think the family deserves a ton of credit. But at a certain point, and this is what Taylor said basically, enough is enough, and we've got to focus on playing hockey. And I think you could see it reflect in the way Connor played the last couple of games.
Yeah, I look forward to his schedule calming down a bit. By the way, John, this segment has been brought to you by Fred Asher.
Fred Asher, wow.
Yeah. Well,
holy smokes.
Sponsors of All-Star Wrestling back
All-Star Wrestling.
I know. We used to go to Fred Asher all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make the big trip to the big city, you know?
Yeah. Get yourself a suit and a tie and go to wrestling. What could be better?
I'd look good.
You look good now. John, thanks for this. We'll talk to you next week.
Hey, I got to go online onto the Czech website and fill out my poll here. So maybe I can get that trip to Harrison Hot Springs.
Yeah, be nice to us.
Oh, I want more Shannon all the time.
5 days a week. We'll work on it. We'll talk to the people at Fred Asher. Thanks, John.